The Sith never feared Obi-Wan Kenobi, and that is one mistake none of them survived. He was not the most powerful Jedi, not the chosen one, not the kind of warrior the dark side should have needed to worry about. But by the time the Empire rises, this man has lost everything. His master, the woman he loved, the brother he raised, the order he served, and the republic he fought for. He is sitting in a cave on Tatooine with nothing left, and not one of them considers him a threat. Every servant of the dark side who crossed his path made the same mistake in a different way. Some through dismissal, others through obsession, and one through the certainty that his empire had already erased everything Obi-Wan stood for. The Sith measure threat by raw force ability, aggression, and the hunger to seize control. Obi-Wan carried none of those signals. By the time any of them began to understand what he actually was, the cost had already been paid in full. They feared Yoda, whose command of the Force was legendary, and Mace Windu, whose combat skill and intensity made him impossible to ignore. They feared Anakin most of all, the Chosen One, overflowing with raw potential that even Sidious could sense from across the galaxy. These Jedi registered as dangerous because they carried qualities the Sith could recognize. Obi-Wan carried no political ambition, no hunger for recognition, and no trace of spectacle. His lightsaber form, Seresu, was built entirely around defense, designed not to overpower an opponent, but to outlast one. His life is defined by who he protected and what he preserved, not by what he conquered. The Sith were not careless in overlooking him. They were blind by design to a kind of strength their entire philosophy had no way to measure. And the first cost of that blindness was paid on Naboo. On Naboo, Darth Maul faces two Jedi and chooses the wrong one to fear. During their duel in the Phantom Menace, Maul focuses his lethal intent entirely on Qui-Gon Jinn, the Master. When the ray shields separate all three fighters, Maul paces in front of Qui-Gon like a predator who has isolated the only prey that matters. He barely glances at the apprentice trapped behind the second barrier, forced to watch and wait. When the shields drop, Maul strikes Qui-Gon down with a single, precise blow. The fight with Obi-Wan that follows is, from Maul's perspective, an afterthought. He does not see this young apprentice as a threat. The real opponent is already gone, and yet it is Obi-Wan who cuts Maul in half. The apprentice, the afterthought, the one Maul barely noticed. By the time Maul realized the younger Jedi was dangerous, he was already falling into the reactor shaft. That blindness has drawn its first blood, clean and merciless. In the canon novel Master and Apprentice, the bond between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan had become deeply personal. Qui-Gon was not just a teacher, he was the person who shaped Obi-Wan's understanding of what it means to serve the Force, and losing him on Naboo left a wound that never fully closed. But the apprentice who watched his master fall did not chase vengeance, and did not abandon the path. He picked up the burden Qui-Gon left behind and carried it forward. To the Sith, that kind of response looks like a man with nothing better to do. To anyone paying closer attention, it looks like the beginning of something they should have feared. But Maul survived, sustained by nothing but consuming rage. Rebuilt by Mother Talzin and his brother Savage Opress, he returned during the Clone Wars consumed by a single fixation, Obi-Wan Kenobi. The very person Maul had dismissed as the lesser opponent became the center of his entire existence. He seized control of Mandalore and built a criminal empire. But the thing that drove him harder than any ambition was a single, consuming need to hurt the man who scarred him. Maul struck down Duchess Satine to make Obi-Wan break, and it did not work. In the canon animated series The Clone Wars, Maul takes the life of the woman Obi-Wan loved right in front of him. Satine was not just a political ally or a wartime friend. She was the life Obi-Wan chose not to live, the future he gave up when he committed himself to the Jedi path. He ended her to force Obi-Wan into the kind of rage that would make him an enemy worth defeating, one whose fall would justify everything Maul had endured since Naboo. But Obi-Wan did not break. He grieved deeply, and still, he did not turn. Maul was left with the same unresolved scar he had carried since the reactor shaft. His hatred was never respect, only humiliation. He could not accept that someone so ordinary had cut him in half, and his resentment kept him chasing a man he had dismissed as nothing. The Clone Wars ended, the Empire rose, and the years passed. Maul lost what little Sidious had ever truly let him have in the first place. In the canon comics Son of Dathomir, Maul is caught between his former master and a dozen competing forces, stripped of every alliance. And still, after all of it, the obsession remained. In the canon animated series Rebels, Maul came to Tatooine for one last confrontation. He was old, desperate, worn down by decades of rage that never found resolution. He tracked Obi-Wan across the desert, and when the two finally stood across from each other under the twin moons, the duel itself was over in 3 strokes. Obi-Wan shifted into Qui-Gon's lightsaber stance. Maul recognized it and fell for the same opening he believed had defeated Qui-Gon years before. But Obi-Wan's blade cut him down. Decades of obsession ended in a single breath. Maul died in the arms of the one man he never understood. Obi-Wan held him as the life left his body. In his final moments, Maul wanted to know if the person Obi-Wan was protecting on this desert world was the Chosen One, and Obi-Wan confirmed it. With his last breath, Maul placed his hope in vengeance, insisting that the Chosen One would avenge them both. Even dying, he could only think in the terms the Sith had given him: revenge, destiny, and power used to punish. But Obi-Wan was not waiting for revenge. He was waiting for hope. That was all the Sith had ever taught Maul to become, a man who can measure strength only by what it can destroy. Maul dismissed Obi-Wan because of his status. Dooku dismissed him for a different reason entirely. Where Maul saw a lesser apprentice and spent decades burning over it, Dooku saw a competent but unremarkable Jedi and moved on without a second thought. Maul at least gave Obi-Wan the weight of an obsession. Dooku never gave him any weight at all. Count Dooku could beat Obi-Wan in a lightsaber duel. In Attack of the Clones, Dooku handles him with ease before Anakin steps in, and in the opening of Revenge of the Sith, the fight leaves Obi-Wan unconscious early. Dooku's combat superiority is not in question. His mistake is judging Obi-Wan by combat alone. Count Dooku looked at Obi-Wan Kenobi and saw everything except what mattered. In the canon audio drama Dooku, Jedi Lost, Dooku follows a path from idealistic Jedi to proud elitist. He's convinced that the Order wastes the talents of its best members. When Dooku looks at Obi-Wan, he sees a Jedi who is competent but not brilliant, disciplined but not visionary. In Attack of the Clones, he even tries to recruit Obi-Wan on Geonosis, offering him an alliance against the corruption he claims to see in the galaxy. That moment reveals exactly how Dooku sees him: someone useful, someone who could be redirected, but not someone who matters on his own. During the Clone Wars, Dooku faces Obi-Wan and Anakin across dozens of encounters, and every one confirms the same bias. His attention locks onto Anakin, the prodigy, the unpredictable talent worth corrupting or removing. Whenever the two of them shared space, Dooku treated Obi-Wan with the polite contempt of an aristocrat stuck with a civil servant. Obi-Wan was the obstacle between Dooku and the prize, never the prize itself. Obi-Wan's importance was never as a duelist. It was personal, built on the bond itself, and it was the one thing Dooku never thought to weigh. He was Anakin Skywalker's brother, his conscience, and his last emotional bridge to the Jedi. In the canon novel Brotherhood, Obi-Wan and Anakin's bond is built on trust and love forged across the Clone Wars. Palpatine spent years driving a wedge between Anakin and the Order, and that campaign depended on Anakin's isolation. Ahsoka Tano's departure had already cracked that foundation, stripping Anakin of the one other relationship built on genuine trust. As long as Obi-Wan was in Anakin's life, that isolation was incomplete. He was the relationship that made Anakin feel known, accountable, and loved for who he was, rather than for what he could do. And Dooku, weighing only on combat outcomes and intellect, saw none of it. Dooku never spared a second thought for the man he could beat in a duel, and unlike Maul, he never got his moment of realization. He falls at the opening of Revenge of the Sith without ever understanding what he missed. His blindness is the quietest in this story, and in some ways, the most complete. Dooku's blindness did not cost him, but it cost every Dark Lord after him. The man Dooku dismissed as a beatable duelist was the one keeping Anakin Skywalker tethered, the one relationship standing between the Chosen One and the complete isolation Palpatine needed to finish his work. None of them saw it, and the cost of that failure came due on the banks of Mustafar, where the lava never stops flowing. The fall of Anakin Skywalker did not happen in a single moment. It was years in the making. Palpatine spent over a decade grooming Anakin, feeding his fears, and convincing him that the Jedi Order was holding him back from his true potential. By the time Obi-Wan arrives on Mustafar, Anakin has already crossed every line. Pledging himself to Sidious, he carried out the purge at the Jedi Temple, sparing no one, and was swallowed whole by the belief that the Jedi betrayed him, that Padme needs him to be powerful, that the dark side is the only path to protecting the people he loves. Every step of this fall follows the logic the Sith have always preached. Fear becomes anger, anger becomes hunger for power, and hunger for power becomes the willingness to sweep away anything standing in the way. Anakin has fully adopted that definition of strength, and it tells him clearly that Obi-Wan Kenobi is not a threat. He's the teacher Anakin has surpassed, the master whose limitations Anakin has outgrown, the Jedi who held him back. On Mustafar, Anakin looked at the man who raised him and saw nothing left to fear. It is the dark side's logic carried to its breaking point. Anakin believes that his rage, his new strength, should be enough to crush any obstacle. He dismisses Obi-Wan's discipline, his patience, the fact that Obi-Wan knows him better than anyone alive, and that is exactly why he loses. The duel does not end because Obi-Wan is angrier, stronger, or more powerful in the Force. The two are closely matched. They fight through the volcanic landscape, two men who know each other's every instinct, every reflex, every habitat in combat. They had trained together for over a decade. Those years of training and a galactic war fought side by side had built the kind of trust and love that only brothers share. All of that knowledge is now being used in the worst possible way, turned against the bond it was built on, in a fight neither of them should be having. Obi-Wan never meets Anakin's rage with his own. He relies on discipline and judgment instead. He warns his former apprentice from the high ground, and Anakin, rather than question his own judgment, chooses to prove himself superior and leaps. Obi-Wan does not need to be the stronger fighter. He lets Anakin's mistake decide the duel. It cost Anakin his limbs, his body, and the life he knew. Nothing about that moment felt like a victory, and that is what makes it unbearable. He is not a conqueror standing over a defeated enemy. He's a brother watching the boy he raised from childhood, the friend who fought beside him through a galactic war, burning on the banks of a lava river with hatred where love used to be. In the Legends novelization of Revenge of the Sith, both sides of this moment cut deeper. Obi-Wan's grief is not satisfaction, and Anakin's fury is not strength. Two brothers stand on opposite sides of everything they once shared, and the duel is decided precisely because the dark side's newest convert looked at Obi-Wan and felt nothing resembling fear. And then Obi-Wan walks away. He leaves Anakin burning on the shore and does not end it. The man who built his life around compassion could not bring himself to deliver the final stroke and could not bring himself to stay. That choice is the reason Darth Vader exists. The one moment where Obi-Wan's selflessness bent under a weight it was never built to carry. The scar Mustafar left on Anakin's body never healed, but the scar left on his mind became far more dangerous. When Anakin becomes Vader, his resentment towards Obi-Wan shifts. Maul's hatred grew from wounded pride. Vader's runs deeper, into guilt he refuses to feel. Vader does not simply want to defeat Obi-Wan. He needs Obi-Wan to confirm the story he tells himself, that Anakin Skywalker is dead, that the past holds no power over him, and that the anguish made him stronger. But as long as Obi-Wan exists anywhere in the galaxy, there is a living witness to who Anakin was, to the choices Anakin made, and to the truth that his fall was not caused by betrayal, but by his own refusal to master himself. If the Jedi path of discipline and selflessness was the better way, then everything Vader has built his new identity around is a lie, not a triumph, not a liberation, but a collapse. And Vader cannot allow himself to feel that, so he buries it under obedience to Sidious, under the machine that keeps his body alive and his memories sealed away. Vader's armor does not prove he has moved beyond the past. It proves he has buried the past so deeply that he can only survive it by refusing to face it. Vader did not fear Obi-Wan the warrior. He feared what Obi-Wan made him feel. In the canon series Obi-Wan Kenobi, Vader hunts his former master with an intensity that goes far beyond strategy. He does not need to end Obi-Wan to hold power. He needs to end him to close a wound. In the canon comic series Darth Vader, set in the years right after Mustafar, Vader builds his new identity around this world. The suit, the voice, the violence, the title of Dark Lord, all of it is armor built to keep one feeling from reaching the surface. the unbearable possibility that Obi-Wan was right, that patience and selflessness were not the weaknesses Anakin believed them to be, that Anakin's fall was not a triumph of liberated power, but the worst kind of defeat. A flashback reaches back to the Clone Wars. During a sparring session, Obi-Wan warned Anakin that his hunger to win blinded him, that his need to prove himself would be the thing that undid him. The lesson was not new on Mustafar. He had been trying to teach it for years. And the flashback carries a second, heavier weight. Obi-Wan knew. He saw the flaw in Anakin long before the fall, and he could not fix it, not because he failed to try, but because Anakin would not let anyone tell him he was wrong. The person who understood Anakin best was the person Anakin listened to least, and by the time the dark side finished its work on him, Obi-Wan's voice was the first one Anakin learned to shut out. Obi-Wan does the one thing no Dark Lord would ever consider. He defeats Vader again, shatters the mask, and sees the ruined face of the man he once called brother. For a moment, neither of them moves. Anakin's eye stares out through the broken armor, and Obi-Wan sees the boy he trained, the father he lost, the wound that never closed. Vader, through the broken armor, insists that he is not Obi-Wan's failure, that he himself destroyed Anakin Skywalker. He says it like a weapon, but the words land like a confession, and Obi-Wan, through tears, accepts it. He tells Vader that his friend is truly gone, and he walks away. Obi-Wan is not abandoning Anakin, but acknowledging that the decision to return has to belong to Anakin alone. He opens his hands and lets the person he loves most walk away into the dark. Vader spent years building an identity designed to never go through what Obi-Wan made him feel. In the Darth Vader comics, the cracks in that armor widen with time, but while Vader was hunting the scar, the man who gave it to him was already somewhere else entirely, doing the one thing no one on the dark side ever thought to look for. The Sith saw a broken hermit in a cave, and that is all they saw. On Tatooine, Obi-Wan lived within sight of a moisture farm where a boy was growing up without any idea who was watching over him. The boy was not alone. Owen and Beru Lars raised Luke inside the ordinary goodness of farm life, while Obi-Wan guarded him from a distance. Years passed in silence. In the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, those first exile years unfold as a time of genuine emptiness. A man who is disconnected from the Force, who flinches at the sound of his own name, who works a dead-end job, and goes home to a hole in the rock. He has no title, no army, no apprentice, no visible influence of any kind. Obi-Wan ate simple meals, spoke to almost no one, and watched the twin suns cross the same sky day after day. The discipline that had once held a Jedi general together now held a lonely man together, and no one in the galaxy would have called it strength. But it was. In the Legends novel Kenobi, that life comes through with painful honesty. A man stripped of every title and connection who still chooses, day after day, to protect a child he cannot claim or even approach. In the canon Star Wars comic series, Obi-Wan is not hiding, he was guarding. Year after year, quietly, without recognition, he protected Luke Skywalker from every threat that came near the boy. He chased off Tusken Raiders and watched from a distance as Luke grew taller, stronger, more like his father in ways that must have been both comforting and painful to see. None of it ever looked like power. All of it was the most important work any Jedi in the galaxy was doing. While Sidious built the Death Star, Obi-Wan guarded the boy who would one day help destroy it. Sidious dismantled the Jedi Temple, disbanded the Council, carried out Order 66, and turned the Chosen One into his personal enforcer. His victory, measured by every standard the Dark Lords respect, was total. He controlled armies, governments, and fear itself. The grand plan laid out in the Legends novel Darth Plagueis had been built across generations to make the Jedi Order impossible to sustain. While Sidious addressed the Senate as Emperor, commanding the resources of a galaxy, the man who had just defeated his apprentice on Mustafar was sitting in a cave, eating dried meat and watching suns set over sand. But Sidious made the same mistake every Sith before him made, and his version ran deeper than the others. His victory had been so complete that doubt itself had become impossible. He measured Obi-Wan against those results and saw wreckage, a defeated exile with no institution behind him, a man who had already lost. Every loss had only stripped away the parts of him the dark side could have corrupted, until nothing remained but the man they could not break. To the most powerful Dark Lord in 1,000 years, Obi-Wan Kenobi was not even worth a second thought. The flaw in Sidious's logic becomes clear at the end of Revenge of the Sith. The Jedi survived the Purge through Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Sidious tore the institution apart, but the Jedi were never fundamentally an institution. The Temple, the Council, the hierarchy were expressions of the Jedi idea, not the idea itself. That idea is a way to live in relationship with the Force, built on selflessness rather than control, and it does not require a temple. It requires a single person willing to carry it and pass it on. Obi-Wan, alone in the desert, was that person. Sidious invested in control on a galactic scale, while Obi-Wan invested in one child on a moisture farm. Of the two, only one would survive to see the second Death Star fall. The child he was protecting would grow up to bring down everything Sidious built. Obi-Wan walked onto the Death Star carrying a gift no Dark Lord could answer. At the end of Revenge of the Sith, Yoda tells Obi-Wan that his former master, Qui-Gon, has discovered a way to maintain consciousness beyond death. Qui-Gon found the path, Yoda learned it, and Obi-Wan mastered it. This chain of knowledge, passed from master to student across 3 generations, is the detail that transforms what happens next. During those exile years, Obi-Wan learned to hear Qui-Gon's voice in the silence, letting the Force move through him again after years of shutting it out. The discipline of those desert nights was preparation for the one act that would outlast his body and reach further than any lightsaber ever could. Without this ability, Obi-Wan falls on the Death Star, and everything that he protected falls with him. With it, his passing becomes the beginning of everything that the Sith failed to foresee. The Dark Lord spent centuries trying to conquer death through power. Qui-Gon found another path, one built on surrender rather than control, a way to continue serving others beyond life itself. Only someone willing to give himself to the Force rather than bend it could walk through that door. Obi-Wan carries that knowledge onto the Death Star, where Luke needs time to escape. On the Death Star, Obi-Wan and Vader face each other one last time. Every loss, every quiet year in the desert has led to this moment. Vader finally has what he has wanted for 20 years, and Obi-Wan stands before him alone, outmatched, with nowhere to run. Obi-Wan does the one thing no servant of the dark side can understand. He stops fighting, looks across the hangar at Luke, raises his lightsaber, and lets Vader's blade pass through him. His body vanishes. Vader stands over an empty robe. He is won, finally striking down the man he has been chasing since Mustafar. But there is no body, no proof. There is only the hollow sound of fabric setting on the floor, and the echo of a voice Vader will never stop hearing. Something is wrong, and Vader can feel it, even if he cannot identify what it was. He stamps his boot on the robe as if pressing the victory into the floor can make it real. Vader believes the fight is over, but the Sith have already begun to lose. Obi-Wan gives his life aboard the Death Star so that Luke can escape. He does not lose because he's too weak or too slow. He chooses to stop. The act is deliberate. The Dark Lords understand death as the final defeat because their entire philosophy is built on possession. Power is something you hold, and death takes it all. But Obi-Wan was never holding anything. He spent his life pouring what he had into the people around him, into Anakin, into Luke, into the idea that the Jedi could survive as long as one person carried the flame forward. The moment Vader struck him down, Obi-Wan stopped being a body they could destroy and became a presence they could never touch. Luke escapes the Death Star. Obi-Wan, now a spirit in the Force, guides him to Dagobah, where Yoda gives him the discipline, the depth, and the grounding that turns a brave farm boy into something far more. Obi-Wan lit the spark. Luke climbed into the cockpit over the Death Star with his former master's voice in his ear, telling him to trust the Force. In the throne room aboard the second Death Star, when Luke refused to strike Vader down, it was the direction Obi-Wan had set, deepened by Yoda, that held him steady. In the canon reference book, The Secrets of the Jedi, influence passes from one generation to the next like a chain, with each generation passing forward what the last one carried. It was the kind of teaching that shapes how a person sees the world, not just how they fight in it. Obi-Wan never built his strength to hold, only to pass on. The Dark Lords hoarded power as personal property. When a Sith Master falls, that power falls with them unless an apprentice has already seized it by force. There is no concept on that side of the Force of freely pouring your knowledge into someone who will surpass you and never owe you anything. Across his entire life, Obi-Wan did exactly that. He did not protect Luke to be served or train him to become a weapon, but because Luke represented the continuation of something he believed in more than his own survival. The Sith had no framework for that kind of giving. They could not recognize it, and by the time it bore fruit, they could not stop it. Luke stands in the throne room, and the Sith have no answer. Sidious demands that Luke strike Vader down. Obi-Wan himself, appearing to Luke in Return of the Jedi, had told him he would have to face Vader. Both the Dark Lord and the last Master of the Jedi pointed Luke towards the same violent end. But Luke refuses. He throws his lightsaber to the floor and refuses to fight, telling the Emperor that the Jedi have not ended, that he carries his father's legacy and will not let it fall. That choice belongs to Luke alone, not transferred from Obi-Wan, not completed from Yoda's training. Luke chose compassion over violence in a moment when both of his teachers had pointed him towards a harder path. Obi-Wan believed Luke would have to face Vader through combat, but the foundation he built was strong enough for Luke to see further than either of his masters ever could. That capacity did not come from a single source. Owen and Beru raised him on a moisture farm where decency was daily practice. Yoda gave him discipline and depth. What Obi-Wan gave him was the connection to something larger, and the willingness to give his own life so the boy carrying it could escape and reach the teacher who would finish what he started. Sidious pours lightning into Luke, and Vader watches his son dying. For a moment, the Dark Lord does nothing. The mask hides his face, but something behind it is shifting, cracking, remembering. And Anakin, the boy Obi-Wan raised, the brother he lost on Mustafar, the wound he carried across 20 years of desert silence, comes back, just long enough to lift his master off the floor and throw him into the reactor core and end the Sith forever. Obi-Wan's legacy reaches its final reward. Yoda deepens what Obi-Wan began, and Luke's own courage transforms it into the one outcome the Sith never expected: mercy, offered freely to the one person the galaxy had every reason to destroy. Obi-Wan Kenobi was never the most powerful Jedi, and that was never the point. The Sith built their empire to withstand everything except a man who needed nothing from it. There is more to the man the Dark Lords overlooked. The true measure of what made him dangerous runs deeper than any of them ever bothered to discover, and the weapon no one thought to fear was hiding in plain sight the entire time. Both trace the same quiet power the dark side was never built to see.